API configured reverse proxy. Yes, you heard it right. You can configure your reverse proxy through REST API. You might have used and configured Nginx, which uses file-based configuration. And not to give false information here, Nginx does support API configuration, but in enterprise version of Nginx, so it is not available in the free and community version. But there is another reverse proxy called caddy, which allows you to configure it through REST API, which is an awesome reverse proxy. So that's what we are going to look into today and try to configure it through REST API. I used it one of my recent project called CAAS, Container as a Service, where I had to configure my reverse proxy rules through API programmatically. So with that, let's begin. Let's start with the basics here. What is a proxy? So there are two types of proxy, reverse proxy and a simple proxy. But proxy is a thing that does something on behalf of other. For example, you are on your browser and you are visiting google.com. If you have a proxy server in between that takes request from you and then send it to the server, then to server, it seems like the request is coming from the proxy server. So it hides you behind that proxy. So in this case, it is called a simple proxy, which sends request to the server on behalf of you. So when it comes to reverse proxy, it is sitting between the server and the client. It seems similar, but now here this Nginx proxy is handling request on behalf of this server. So anybody requesting to this Nginx reverse proxy, the request will go to the server as if it seems to the client as if it is talking to the real server, but it is going to the reverse proxy and the reverse proxy is sending it to the backend servers. Now why do you want to do a reverse proxy? Because it is much more simpler to manage multiple servers when it is behind a reverse proxy, and it is much more easier to transfer the request based on parameters like what is the route, what is the domain, what is the query parameter behind this domain. So anything can be used as a parameter to route the traffic to one server to another server. For example, in these modern days, every system consists of microservices. You might have a lot of different microservices for different kind of things. For example, this google.com/apps, maybe your apps are running on this server and maybe your google.com main website is running on this server. So you don't want people to go to different server on their own just to visit these two different sites. So you will take that request and based on the URL, you will automatically, Nginx will automatically transfer the request to the specified server. So user don't have to visit different server on their own. And sometimes it is also used as load balancing. For example, there are a lot of traffic, then the traffic can be splitted between servers from a single point of entry. So user have a single point of entry, that is Nginx reverse proxy, and it will transfer the request to multiple server to handle a lot of traffic. That's a basic idea of a reverse proxy. So but in this video we are not talking about Nginx, we are talking about caddy. So let's move and see how we can use and configure caddy reverse proxy. Now since the basics are out of the way, now we can talk about the actual thing. So we were talking about how we can configure a reverse proxy through API, and in this case our reverse proxy is caddy. So let's start. First of all, you need to have caddy installed. So when you go to their website and you go to download section, you can download it based on what platform you are in, for example Linux or Windows or Mac. So in terms of installing it, based on different distribution, you can install it on your own. I leave it up to you. If you have Ubuntu, Arch Linux or Fedora, whatever it is, just get caddy server downloaded on your machine to get started. Now when you first start caddy by using caddy run, it starts your server with an admin endpoint of localhost 2019, but it doesn't have anything right now. So if I do curl localhost 2019 and /config, I will see nothing, null, because it doesn't have any configuration. But if you are starting caddy with an existing configuration, then it might return something similar to this structure, where it shows a little bit of details. For example, the admin port is listening on which address, what are the apps and HTTP servers. So in this case, this is a basic example that I am showing right now. So you might receive something similar to this, or if you have a completely new installation and a completely blank running caddy server without any configuration, then you might receive null. So now from here we can start configuring our server through API. I will show this demonstration using a real server, because the real server actually has a public IP address or domain and something that we can actually configure. So let's start configuring the actual server now. I will close this all and I will connect to my actual server. Now I have port forwarded the admin console of my caddy server, which is running on this server. This is an actual server, by the way. The port 2019 listening on that server is forwarded to my local port 2019. So if I do curl on 2019/config, then it will actually go to the actual server and bring the config and print it on the console here. Now let's actually configure a route and see how does that look like. I have a pretty simple project here which has just two scripts. One script is get config and save config. The get config is just a simple TypeScript file that does a get request on config and save it to a file called autosave.json. So now if I run get config, then it will actually go to the server, bring the config and save it to my local file. So this is the local configuration which is available from that server. So now you can see there are multiple routes that I have set up, but we are going to add a new one. So let it be, for example, if I go to my server, let's start a server that we can actually host. So for example, docker run -rm-p. We want to listen on local port 3030, which will be 80 inside container nginx and start. So now our demo nginx application is running on the server. Now what we want to do, we want to add a route. For example, let's edit this file. I can directly edit this file, and if I run this save config, it will load that config into the caddy server automatically through API that you can actually see axios.post. So now let's edit this, and let's say I will just make a copy, and I will say this is a test which I want to forward it to test.mydomain, and I want to forward that to localhost 7.0.0.1 and the port number is 3030. Now this simple configuration tells caddy that if any request is coming on test.anisaraz.com.np, then forward it to the localhost port 3030 on which our nginx server is running. So now if I save this and then run another script which is save config, then it will run this command which is doing nothing but making a post request to this URL which is our server's caddy, and onto which it will read the autosave.json file and it will directly send the JSON file to this route here, and which will again configure the caddy through API. So if I run save config, then our config must be saved. Now if I say, let's say curl and check if it actually exists, then there you can see it actually exists on our caddy configuration. Now let's go to Cloudflare and I will add a test domain with the actual IP address. I will black this out in editing because I don't want to show my public IP address. So now the domain is added. If I go to test.anisaraz.com.np, voila, you can see that the server is running and we can forward it to our server, which is actually configured through caddy API. Now just to be real, I will close this server and again try to reload. Bad gateway, we don't have anything to show. Again I will run the server and again reload. It's running. So now what if you want to delete it? So when you want to delete it, there are multiple other routes that you can use to configure your caddy server, but in this case I am simply getting the whole configuration, editing as I want, and then saving the whole configuration again. But if you want to take a deep dive and look into caddy API documentation, you will find that they have all sorts of port, post, get, delete that you can use to configure your caddy server. Why did I do this? So when I go to the actual server that I have used caddy with, this was the project that I was talking about where I used this caddy server to programmatically control the reverse proxy configuration. So here if I go and create a container, let's do it very quickly. We'll fast forward it to make this all quick. Now here I am. So I wanted that if somebody adds a route, for example, the same, let's say new route and new dot, I will zoom it a little bit. I want to create a new dot anisras.com.np which I want it to be forwarded to, let's say, my server 3030. So I had to do it programmatically. So when I click add, it will actually go to the caddy server and write the configuration and return back me a success message. So this is what I wanted to do with caddy, and actually programmatically configure that to forward that request of domain to that particular port. So this was my use case. You can use it on your own for your different use cases. Maybe you have to configure something similar to mine when you have to configure your server's reverse proxy rule through API. You don't want to edit files, so that's for you. So that is pretty much it for this video. Maybe you want to see some other video on my channel, maybe this one or that one. See you in the next one. Keep watching.